This is the Simpit. I'm your host, Sean Cole, but the real star of today's show is the PSL Sequential Shifter, also known as the ProSim Light Simulator Sequential Gear Shifter. And the last thing I would call this shifter is light, not in weight, not in function, and not in price, but let's get back to that. The ProSim Light Sequential Shifter is serious racing gear. When I think of the equipment that Formula One teams use or professional simulators are built upon, let's face it, they're not looking for off-the-shelf sim racing products. They're looking for pro gear, and that's exactly what the ProSim Light Shifter is built for. And that is exactly what ProSim specializes in, and the PSL Shifter is a perfect example. The ProSim PSL Sequential Shifter goes for a hefty 329 British pounds, which equals $426 here in the USA. And I know that sounds like a ton of money, but let's talk about what you get for that money. The PSL Shifter is an all-metal or mostly metal design. It has a look to it that is straight out of a real-life race car. In fact, the shifter was actually designed with the same type of internals as a real-life Quaife shifter. Sequential shifter should come as no surprise. You see their name right here on the shifter, and it also should come as no surprise because Adrian Quaife Hobbs is actually one of the people behind ProSim. So they took those years of expertise in racing for transmission and gear shifting work, put that into the ProSim Light Shifter, and that made it a perfect part of the lineup from their exotic line of racing parts, sim racing parts. The shifter, as I mentioned, is made of mostly metal. The two sides of the shifter are black in color and very sturdy. The two sides are held together by metal tubes with bolts running through them, and this holds the two sides together. Meanwhile, the top and the back have plastic windows that allow you to look inside and see the moving parts, also made mostly of metal. On the top is a very large screw with a lockdown bolt. This allows for the tension adjustment of the shifter. On the front window is a mounted USB square or A plug to connect to the PC. The actual shifter arm or shaft is very hefty, and on top of it is a plastic handle that is comfortable in the hand. There's also an aluminum handle available for an additional 8 pounds or $10. The overall dimensions of the shifters are 189 millimeters or about 7.5 inches front to back. It's about 105 millimeters or a little over 4 inches wide at the base, and then about 113 millimeters or almost 4.5 inches tall, not including the shifter. When measuring from the bottom to the top of the shifter, it is 225 millimeters or nearly 9 inches tall. The shifter has 4 slots cut into the base for mounting. These slots allow 4 bolts to hold the shifter in place securely. These slots are about 143 millimeters or 5.5 inches apart long ways, and then 85 or about 3.3 inches wide. The slots are actually 15 millimeters in length or about 1/2 inch long, giving you a little bit of freedom front and back. And the word hefty can be used in so many ways to describe the ProSim Light Shifter, anything but light. The ProSim Light Shifter comes in at 2.8 kilograms or 6.25 pounds. The throw of the shifter is preset and has about 1.5 inches or 38 millimeters of travel in each direction. The shifter is mainly for PC use. It is plug and play. Just plug it in, let Windows recognize it, map your controls in game, you're up and running. The only real adjustment is the tension, which is adjusted here. Screw this out and it's much, much lighter. Screw it all the way in and it's much tighter. We'll cover that more later. And if you really want to use it on a console, you can, as long as you use some kind of keyboard emulator, but it is pretty simple and basic in that respect. Now, many shifters available use a very similar method of operation. You have an arm that moves, you have springs, cushioning, some kind of friction device giving you that feeling like a sequential shifter, and then at the end of its throw, it engages some kind of a magnetic switch or a button, some kind of a switch. That's very typical, and you'll find it across the board. In the case of the ProSim Light Shifter, they've gone a completely different route. Again, it's designed by the guys behind Quaife Engineering, so they've taken that different approach to a sequential shifter. So let's go ahead and take a look inside and see how it actually operates. We can actually pull the side cover and see the internals of the shifter. Once inside, we can see how it operates. The shifter arm moves back and forth. It has a swing arm that will then either be pushed up or down as the arm moves. At the end of the swing arm is a shifting fork, and this fork engages a spinning wheel and either turns it clockwise or counterclockwise by pushing the pins on each tooth or lobe of the spinning wheel. It then retracts by sliding over those pins and back into the ready position upon release. The arm also triggers a magnetic switch at the top and bottom of its full stroke. The resistance and the click that you hear and the feel is handled by the spinning wheel and the geared teeth or lobes with their valleys. A spring-loaded ball bearing pushes into those valleys and then is pushed out of the way by the teeth on the spinning wheel. This pushes the ball into the spring, and the tighter we make that spring, the more resistance there is to overcome when shifting. It is a beautiful piece of engineering and still rather simple in its operation. In the case of mounting shifter, it is a unique design, so most rigs are not going to come pre-drilled for it. In the case of my R-seat, I had a nice platform to work with, so I used a couple of strips of aluminum profile tubing and some angled mounting pieces to work as an adapter. This could have been done with metal or wood and was not hard to accomplish. While out on the track and driving, this shifter is really like no other shifter that I have tested. I have driven a car with a sequential gearbox, and there is a clunk that happens when the gear change occurs. A clunk that you feel in your hand, and it is noticeable with each and every shift. The ProSim Lite shifter has a very similar feel. Exact? Well, no, but the closest that I have felt from a sim racing component. At first I had the tension very strong, and this made the shifter a bit difficult to operate, or certainly harder than I had expected it to be. But I chose to first get used to this before immediately turning it lower. Despite taking a lot of pressure, it was actually pretty close to the strength of the shifter in the car that I'd driven in real life. I found that I had to really shift with intention. I had to press with authority and demand that the car gave me a new gear. After only a handful of laps, the timing of the shift became obvious and could be timed with the sim very naturally. Shift after shift, I was met with a clunk after clunk, and the demanded shift occurred just the same. This added a new level of immersion. It wasn't just a click of a button or a tiny spring trying to mimic a shift. It was a new level of feedback that sucked you farther into the game. I found myself getting into the groove and really enjoying the over-dramatic shifts and the loud clunking sound rhythmically changing the sim. I found the shifter's throw of 1.5 inches to be rather perfect. Enough for there to be travel and at the same time not so far to be overextended or find myself reaching. It was tight, it was quick, and it was rock solid. I did then loosen up the tension of the shifter to see how it felt with lighter settings. This was done very quickly and easily and needed no calibration changes after. Just loosen up the lockdown bolt, turn out the spring until you get the desired attention, and then lock down the bolt again. And then with lighter tension, it really changed two things. The amount of pressure required to shift, and then it didn't make quite as loud of a clunk. But it was still a very significant moment, the moment of shifting. Even at its lightest settings, the shifts required intention. You will not accidentally press it down soon by placing your hand on the lever, and it will require more than a fingertip to move. It will take a certain amount of authority to overcome its resistance. And on the heavy side of things, well, I was able to go way beyond what I would ever want or that any real-life shifter could possibly require. So in driving, this shifter was outstanding. It exceeded my expectations, but that doesn't mean that it was perfect. So let's go ahead and break things down with the good, the not so good, and the bottom line, starting off with the good, and that is that awesome clunk that you get when you're shifting. Heavy duty. Bulletproof. Added immersion of a sequential gear shift. Very lifelike feel. The best I've ever felt for a sequential. Adjustable tension. Plug and play. And now on to the not so good, and the first being very obvious, and that being its price. It's not going to be affordable for some people. It is very expensive. Requires an extremely strong mounting surface. Might require adapting to your rig. Very loud shifter. And now on to the bottom line. In the world of sim racing, our equipment can be broken into a few different categories. You've got starter level equipment, hobbyist level equipment, and then pro level sim racing equipment. You cannot expect that pro level sim racing equipment to come in at the same price point or even in the ballpark of starter or hobbyist level equipment, but you can have higher expectations. The Pro Sim Lite shifter feels like real racing equipment, or better yet, as close to a real-life sequential shifter without having an actual gearbox attached. For me, it's a no-brainer. Paddle shifters are going to beat a sequential shifter in a lap time shootout. However, there are still 3 reasons to pick a sequential shifter over paddle shifters. Number 1 being realism and authenticity. Number 2, to recreate an actual car that you might drive in real life. And number 3, rhythm. And this is the one I want to focus on the most. Rhythm. Rhythm is an important part of sim racing. When using a sequential shifter, I find that it helps me with my rhythm. It helps me with my timing. And this helps me do a better job of constantly shifting at the proper moment. With paddle shifters, I have a tendency to downshift too quickly and sometimes disrupt the car. But now you're going to have to weigh that rhythm factor versus taking your hands off the wheel dozens of times per lap. But there is no arguing over points 1 and 2. And that takes me back to justifying the price of this shifter. And if you're trying to accomplish number 1, realism and authenticity, or number 2, recreating a car that you drive in real life, well then you can't do much better than this shifter. Well, that is, except for its big brother. For 850 British pounds or $1,037. And its even bigger brother, the full H-pattern shifter, which is incredible to even look at for a whopping 1,250 British pounds or about 1,600 bucks. Neither of which I have tested. But for people who are looking to accomplish number 1 and number 2 and add a sequential shifter to their sim racing experience, well then I don't think they're going to find that price too obscene to accomplish that goal. For me, it was a pleasure to drive this shifter. I enjoyed the loud audible clunk that some people might find too loud. I loved the heavy resistance that reminded me of the Alan Berg open wheeler that I got to drive. I enjoyed the added realism of using a shifter despite it might not being the fastest way around the track. And I really love that sim racing has gotten to the point where it has a pro level, and it's within the reach of us normal sim racers. Times are a-changin'. So I hope you've enjoyed this review of the Pro Sim Lite sequential shifter. And I hope that I have answered any questions that you might have about it in this review. But if I did miss anything, if you do have any questions, I encourage you to email me directly at sean@thesimpit.com and I'll be sure to answer your email. This is The Simpit. I'm Sean Cole, and I'll see you on the track.